that we should just admire it and then go our own way. Rather, God's space is filled with the crown of his visionary purpose, hidden in the created life and relationships. You see, God is a relational being, and he filled that empty space, friends, with the crown of his creative activity. He created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. It's a beautiful story. The point that I'm trying to say is that God created a space, his home, for a specific purpose. He created a purpose of relationship, not just a place of adoration. God is a relational being. And so, just to give you a brief summary, in the Old Testament, you have the story of God's dream. You see, in chapter 2 of the book of Isaiah, we won't go there into details. You can study it on your own. Just, Isaiah chapter 2, Jerusalem was to become the center of the entire world. People from all over the world were invited to visit Jerusalem to discover what God was all about. They were to learn from his people the mighty acts of God. We've talked about remembering today. People were to recall that remembrance and share the reality of God's presence in life. In chapter 5, God opens his heart, the brokenness, the pain of his heart. He said, I have planted a garden. I have nurtured the garden. I have surrounded it with my presence, hoping that it will bring forth fruit. But it produced sour grapes. And in Isaiah chapter 1, God cries over his people. The crown of his relationship disappointed him in a sense, and God cried over his people. But then in the Old Testament, please turn your Bibles to the book of Isaiah chapter 40. In fact, I would like to suggest to you that this is my favorite passage. Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40, and I will focus on verse 9 and 10. Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 9 and 10. Perhaps I will start reading from verse 9. You who bring good tidings to Zion, go up on high mountain, you who bring good tidings to Jerusalem. Lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it out. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, he is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and his arms rules. But notice now verse 11. What kind of rulership was God providing for his people? He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. For so many years and decades, God put out with the story of Israel that disappointed God in a sense. People that disappointed, yet continue his reaching out to them. And now prophet is saying, but we have expectations. We're waiting for the Messiah. And when he will come, this is the picture of the Messiah. A God who is a relational God. And friends, as we go to the end of that story, of the brokenness of Jerusalem, remember Jesus came to touch the life of his people. He ministered to them. He healed them. He provided hope for them. And then in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus looked at his city and he cried over the city. And he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers the chicks under the wings, and you are not with me. Look, your house is left desolate. So what was the hope? You see, God created a garden, a space, a place of safety and security. His story moved on because God had expectations for his people to continue that story. And now that place would become desolate. And you see, friends, Jesus, just before his departure, shared a beautiful hope with his disciples. And there's a story with it. You know that well-known text. We quote it so many times. I think in my service that I presented for Masterbrook Church, I've referred to that briefly. But I want to recapture it again because it's so important. In John chapter 14, Jesus said, do not let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house, in my Father's house has many rooms. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me. We quote often this text from the perspective of expectations, the future reality that God will prepare for his people in the future. Now, the disciples did not understand that story because Jesus gave the promise just before his death on the cross. And if you go to John chapter 13, there's a beautiful story. I'll paraphrase the story. Jesus says to his disciples, I'm going to go away. I can't be with you anymore. I'm not going to be with you anymore. I'm going away. So the disciples, in all the excitement, they didn't expect Jesus to go away because they felt that he would establish the Messianic kingdom of righteousness, peace, and tranquility. That's what they were waiting for. How would he go away? But now Jesus is saying, I need to depart from you. I won't be with you anymore. And the disciples said, we want to go with you. And Jesus said to them, you can't go with me. Now Peter, the big mouth of the company, he just came up with it. He says, Lord, I love you so much. It doesn't matter what it means. I'm going to go with you, even if it means to die for you. I wish I was a fly on the wall to recapture that story, to see Peter's faith in Jesus' face. Because Jesus probably looked at Peter and said, really, Peter? Do you know what you're saying? What you do not understand, that shortly you will deny me. You see, the disciples did not understand that the way to the Father's cross, to the Father's home, was through the cross. That's where Jesus was heading. Jesus was heading home to prepare a place, but he began to shape that place on the cross. The disciples later on realized that because they were so convinced that the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ opened a new hope, a new understanding. And it is so for us, friends. It doesn't matter how deep your theology is, how argumentative you and I may become. The story is quite simple. The way to the Father's cross, to the Father's homes, is through the cross. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father but through me. And Jesus began to shape the story of the home of the cross. And today, you and I have the opportunity to step into that space of God's grace and live in a sphere of hope, not fear. But what about Jerusalem as a place of glory? You see, in Revelation chapter 21, verse 9 and 10, it's quite interesting. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues, okay, that's quite frightening. He says to John, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the spirit to a mountain, great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. You see, the angel in the vision places John at the vantage point of victory. It reminds me of another story. Remember the temptations of Jesus? Jesus spent some time in the wilderness and Satan came to tempt him. And one of the temptations was he took him to the holy city and had him to stand at the highest point of the temple. And he said to me, "Bow down before me, worship me, and everything will be yours." Jesus said, "You can only worship God. I will not bow down." You see, Jesus gained victory. And so now John is standing at the point of victory accomplished by Jesus, and he's beholding everything that's going to happen there. Because the holy city, Jerusalem, shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. Now, I don't know, but if my imagination does not run wild, imagine that at the story of all your struggles, all your disappointments, all your heartaches, God is preparing, opening his heart to prepare the very best. All the precious stuff, everything that put me up there, everything that's beauty is included in that concept of the city of Jerusalem. But that's not all, friends. There's something else. Because in that same chapter 21, you have a description. I'm paraphrasing them for the sake of time. Read Revelation chapter 21. Because when John saw that holy city, Jerusalem, the dwelling place of God, he saw that it had gates, 3 gates on each side, north, south, east, and west, with the names of the children of Israel. The 12 foundations were names of the 12 apostles. Is it possible to suggest that the concept presented here is not a concept of perfect people, but it presents a story of people who are on a journey like you and I, and they find their place because they step into that initial place of security provided by Jesus. And now they represent the children of Israel. And it's another interesting story is that you will find in Revelation chapter 7 the name of Manasseh. The name of Manasseh is included among the children of Israel. You know that story from the book of Genesis. Joseph came to his father Jacob, brought his 2 sons. The firstborn was Manasseh, and the secondborn was Ephraim. Now Joseph blesses the children, but instead of blessing the firstborn first, he blessed the secondborn first. And Joseph was very upset, and he says, "No, father, you got it wrong." And he said, let it be. And if you look at the story between the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, Ephraim was very rebellious tribe. But God was trying to reach out to the tribe, opening his heart with Ephraim, "I want to save you." But they just were rebelling all the time.